Hey, Life Pixers. Hope you're having an awesome day. Are you ready to better understand yourself, your partner, and your marriage? Woo, I really think you will today. Now, before we get into it, if you haven't yet taken the productivity assessment, free productivity assessment, I should add, go right now to lifefixuniversity.com/mindset and see if your mindset is helping you or stopping you from being productive and improving all areas of your life. Now, today's guest, I am excited for somebody a little bit different and really interesting. He originally came from Wall Street and today helps couples from a really different perspective than what other people think. He thinks he solves the marriage problem. I think that's a really big claim to make. And I know we had other guests who also said that, and everyone has their own perspectives on these things, but he most definitely has some great things that I can't wait to hear about. So thank you so much, Tim, for being here. I am excited to get into this. You want to start by telling us what was something you did as a kid that your parents laugh about till today?
Something I did as a kid that my parents still laugh about. Oh, dude, what did I do? We mostly got in trouble when I was a kid. Something I did that my parents laughed about. I don't know. I've been playing soccer since I was 5, and there were some bad soccer plays that my dad was big into sports. So in fact, I remember one where I was playing goalie and the ball just spun between my legs into the net. So that's how I had to say something in sports that I did that my parents found humorous that I didn't do as I should have, as good as I should. My dad was big into sports.
Oh, and are you as big into sports as he was?
I have been playing soccer since I was 5. I played in college. We were Big 8 champs 2 of the 4 years. I went to undergrad at Missouri. So in fact, I just finally, a few years ago, finally got to the age where I'm too old to play, unfortunately. So you're younger than I am, so we won't have any aging conversations, but getting older physically can be tough.
Yes. Well, I hope to be that active also at that age. So let's see what we'll be then. Like you said, age gap, we're not talking about that. You mentioned quite a few interesting things that I want to get into, but first I want to hear about where did you come up with your solution of what you call the solution to all marriage problems?
A great question. So the background and what led me to being in this business is, first of all, I am not a psychologist. I actually have an engineering degree.
You've got real brains. I have a lot of respect for anyone who has an engineering degree.
Well, it gets even worse. I was the first semiconductor analyst on Wall Street to focus on the communications market. That was my claim to fame in the 90s. So I am definitely a nerd. I am definitely very analytical. But the other part of my story, when I was 12 years old, I told my mom I wanted to be a Catholic priest when I was 12 years old. And then I discovered girls. So that whole career path kind of got derailed. Exactly. You can't be a priest and like girls. That doesn't go very well together. So women won out. But the point is I was raised with a moral compass. And at the height of the market, I had met this girl. It was actually a girl that I had known for about 8 years. She was in the same circle of friends that I was in Dallas, except she always had a boyfriend and I always had a girlfriend. Well, we got together when we weren't dating anybody. And as anybody watching this who's ever fallen in love with the right person knows, it happens very quickly. So we got together very like two magnets, just got together. We were made for each other, fell in love. We were going to spend the rest of our lives together. And then we started fighting. But
you remember your first fight?
I have it written in my book. I remember the trip we went on, and she got mad at me because I didn't stay by the luggage. When I told her I did, I went and looked at magazines. I remember that first fight as if it was yesterday, because it was, in fact, the first one is the shock, because you're in love, you're together, you're going to spend the rest of your life together. Then all of a sudden, there's this different side. But the point is we went to a therapist looking for help, and he didn't help us. And in fact, in the psychology world, they call it the double bind. When I turn right, I run into a wall. And when I turn left, I run into a wall. It was such a traumatic experience for me. It was so painful for me to go through. As a Wall Street analyst, and anybody watching this, just so you know, what a Wall Street analyst does is we analyze industry. That's the bottom line, is we become experts in industries. And so I thought, well, with my background, I could write a book that's going to solve the problem. And that's what I've done. I've been working on this project for about 20 years. It's what I do that's unique, just so you know, is I'm the first person in the marriage business to address marriages both mentally and psychologically. Marriage advice today is behavioral advice, like date night or the 5 love languages. Those don't work, by the way. And so what I do that's new is I teach people how to understand their relationships, both mentally and psychologically. And when you approach it that way, then you can understand what works, why what doesn't work, and how to fix what doesn't work so it works. That's in essence the 3 big steps that I go into. And just to finish this answer, when I say I've solved the marriage problem, the solution to the problem is equality.
Is equality,
where nobody's in charge. Where there are no distinctions, there can be no superiority. Perfect equality affords no temptation for abuse or control. What you're doing is when you understand the notion of equality, you understand that nobody's in charge. The thing that causes relationships not to work, this is the one dominant factor that is present in almost all relationships that don't work, and that is control. One or both are trying to control the marriage.
Do you really think that there are people still today who think that the relationship shouldn't be equal? I mean, like, we see it all the time that, like you said, like somebody's trying to control, but when you actually speak to them, do they realize what they're doing? Or to me, it's just like so unhealthy. And I'm like, obviously you both need to agree and you both need to be able to be equal. And there's going to be differences and you're 2 different people. So there's going to be differences and you're both going to have different opinions. But they're both to be respected and both to be worked through.
So Esty, the foundation of my entire conversation is that we have a 50% divorce rate in this country. That is an unfathomable aspect of the marriage business. Think about it from this perspective. Imagine if 50% of our cars fail, or 50% of our phones fail. If we had a failure rate of 50% in any other aspect of our life, we would have the weight of the world collapsing on that issue to make sure we figured out why 50% of our phones failed. Yet we have 50% of marriages that fail, and we have very little effort that's been put into figuring out how to make marriages work. Because the reality and the answer to your question is, in the psychology world, they're referred to as shadows. When you get into the understanding of the psychology of the relationship, you realize that people cannot see, they're blind to their own fears, in essence. When we get into the psychology, the only reason why I can comfortably and confidently say that I have solved the marriage problem is because I forgave my parents when I was 25 years old. It turns out the biggest influence in a marriage is the relationship with the parents, because that's where those belief systems come up. So if you have some belief system from your childhood, say your parents got divorced, for example, you now have a fear, unless you're aware of it and you are fixing it, you have an unconscious fear that your marriage will end because your parents end. And unfortunately, the reality in relationships is whatever you are afraid of happening in your marriage actually happens. That's an unfortunate reality. And that's a big reason why we have a 50% failure rate in marriage, because people are afraid of marriage.
Why are people afraid of marriage? Because obviously, like you're saying, it's a childhood thing, but let's take, for an example, someone who did come from a healthy family as a kid and their parents are still happily married, and then later on they get divorced. What would their fear be?
You still talking if the parents were happily married while the kids were children, but later in life
No,
they got
I'm talking about,
divorced?
let's say somebody's parents are still married. Their parents have been married for 50 years or something, right?
Right.
And they're still married today, and they have two children, and their two children, one of them is married and got divorced after 3 years.
Well, I'm using the divorce example as an example, but the reality is when I say I forgave my parents, it turns out we are supposed to be born twice. The first is obvious, is biologically, but the second is psychologically into adulthood. The bar mitzvah and the bat mitzvah in the Jewish tradition, the first communion in the Christian tradition. I'm in South Florida, the quinceanero in the Latino tradition. These are all initiation ceremonies to initiate us into adulthood. Unfortunately, they occur in our lives when we're still too young. They occur in our early teenage years where we're not yet in today's world. When they were created, we become adults at that age. But in today's world, we don't start the adult process until we're at least in our 20s. We've grown up, we've got out of the house, we might have gone to college, we might have gotten into a couple of relationships. We start realizing, understanding this notion of self-identity in our early to mid 20s. And if we are aware, if we become aware of these lessons, because it's the reality is if you had any fear, not just your parents got divorced, and the reality is, and here's the way I kind of explain this. I was working with a couple once, and they had included in the seminar their daughter and fiance. Their daughter was in their early 20s. So I'm explaining this dynamics between parents and children and how what the children get from their upbringing from their parents, they bring as an adults into their own marriage. But the point I made in that dialogue was the perspective of the children could be different than the perspective of the adult. Let me give you my example. Okay. My parents were very strict. My dad, unfortunately, is no longer around. But if you were to call my mom up right now and you would ask her about raising her 4 children, she will tell you. She says is every time I talk to her that she was strict on her kids. She was strict on her 4 kids. I was at my 20-year high school reunion, and I was talking to a fellow classmate of mine, and I made some comment about my strict parents. And he looked at me and goes, "Oh, that's right. You had the strict parents." And that conversation turned on a huge light bulb because I realized that when I was in high school, I never thought of what other people thought about me. Never once. Never even entered my mind what my parents thought about me, what my friends thought about me. It was all about me, which is, again, what we are supposed to be doing at those ages because we're starting to develop an identity. It's one of the steps of the maturing process is actually being able to see other people, understand it from other people's perspective. And you don't get to understand that until you cut those strings from your childhood, whatever negative perspectives you may have from your childhood. Divorce is just one example, but your parents were real strict on you. My parents spanked me. I mean, that, to be honest with you, we were raised with the belt. I mean, I'm grateful because I realized that I have good parents and my parents did a good thing. But it took me forgiving them before I was able to see the good that my parents did. That's what happens when you go through the healing process. You actually see the value in the lesson of what you've been taught versus beforehand you're blaming other people for your problems.
Yeah. It's taking, as Jack Canfield says, 100% responsibility for your life. So let's get tactic here. How does a person begin to really understand their relationship? Let's start from a psychology point of view.
Okay. So what you learn, what I am in essence teaching, the Chinese have a saying, and that saying is that history is a mirror. Think about this. When you look in the mirror, who do you see? Yourself. But do you know who you are? And the way that you get to know who you are is by understanding your history. Understanding all of these things that you learn, particularly when it comes to love and relationships. And so what brings that out, this is when you really understand it, you really can figure out how powerful it is the conflicts. When you learn how to deal with conflicts, you can get to the point where two people learn to grow together. Let me explain this. Okay. So there's two types of conflicts. One of them is a disagreement. Okay. And the example I use, Esty, is say you and I become business partners. I am the accountant and you want to buy a $5,000 computer and we can't afford it. We now have a problem. Okay. But how do we solve it? We solve it logically. You will understand my perspective on what we can and cannot afford. I will understand your perspective on what functionality you're trying to get out of the computer. We're going to understand it from each other's perspective, and we're going to figure out a solution that works for the best for the two of us. That is logical. It's forward-looking. Okay. The other side of the coin is an argument. An argument is emotionally based, and it's backward looking. In fact, an argument is a control mechanism. And so what I do to explain this is I break an argument down into its component parts. Because if you understand the psychological dynamics that goes into an argument, you will understand why you're having the argument. And it begins, again, with an insecurity. Again, I use the mom and dad getting divorced because it's an easy example. So mom and dad got divorced. You now have a fear, which is an insecurity about your marriage. That fear then becomes a prejudice. One of the things that you are the first, this is the first for you to ever hear this because I'm the one that has figured it out. No one else on the planet has figured this out, but our mental problems are prejudices, which are preconceived opinions. That's what a prejudice is. I call them relationship prejudice. Again, like mom and dad got divorced. That prejudice then leads to being judgmental, which then leads to being angry. And so what I'm doing, and then I'll break this down and give you a real life example, is I'm connecting the dots between fear and anger. If you can understand that when there is anger, underneath the anger is a fear. And now you can address the fear, which is the psychological conversation, instead of the way we do it in today's world, which is addressing the anger. So let me give you an example. And this is the breakthrough. This is really profound. So you come home late from work and your partner gets mad at you, okay? The caveat here is that you're not out drinking with your friends. You actually got to call at 5 p.m. You weren't doing something you weren't supposed to be, is what I'm saying. You got to call at 5 p.m. You were busy for an hour. You didn't think about on the way home to call your partner. You get home and your partner's mad. Think about the normal reaction when that occurs. It's fight or flight. You're either going to defend yourself, Esty, you're such an idiot for not calling me. Well, husband, you're such an idiot for saying that. I mean, that's a fighting mechanism, or you're just going to say, I'm not dealing with this. And you go and you flee, you go hide, right? But what you'll learn is that he is mad at you for coming home late for work, not because you come home late from work. He's mad at you because he has low self-esteem issues. He has abandonment issues. Again, mom and dad man got divorced. He has some fear underlying his angry response, because if it wasn't a fear, he wouldn't have gotten angry. He would have just stated it. Just like you want a $5,000 computer, we're going to discuss that. So if you get home late from work and he looks and goes, sweetheart, you're late, and you said you're going to be home at 5, and then it's a calm, logical conversation. But if you struck a nerve, that's anger. To argue with a person who has abandoned the use of reason is like administering medicine to the dead. Once you get to that point of an argument, you're at a point of no return. You cannot solve an argument. And so what you do is you get to the fear. So if you just learn when he gets mad at you to look at him and go, sweetheart, what are you afraid of? That what are you afraid of question has stopped arguments in their tracks, because what it does is it pulls them from that emotional state, which they're in when they're angry, back to the logical state. So now we can have a logical conversation to the real source of the problem, which had nothing to do with you coming home late from work. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. And I really like the question, what are you afraid of? Because of this. Did you ever hear of EFT, emotionally focused therapy?
Yes.
Right? Now, emotionally focused therapy, as you know, and as listeners know, we had quite a few episodes of this on. Most recent one was 226, is also where they go into the fear. But there, they focus more on the emotions and they stay more in the emotions. While here, you're recognizing that there's an emotion, but you're moving out of the emotion and into the logic.
It's important to understand that the psychology industry is still based on the biology theory. So whenever you're citing anything to do with the current psychology industry, it's based on the biology theory, which basically says there's no logic. The mind is not capable. The difference between humans and animals is we can think, animals can't. Animals have feelings just like we do. But because of the biology theory, the psychology industry deals with emotions. It's the how does it make you feel question. But they've not yet figured out how to solve those negative emotions. That requires thinking, which because of the biology theory, it hinders their ability to expand beyond the emotional state of mind into the logical state of mind, because they don't actually believe we have a logical state of mind because of the biology theory. And so what I'm doing is this is the honest to God truth. And if you think about it, the how does it make you feel question, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, is the most common form of therapy today, and it doesn't work, and it's designed to prolong the therapy process so that the therapist can make more money, but it doesn't solve the problem. If you ever go into a therapist's office and they look at you and say, how does it feel, the fight that you had with your spouse last week, that therapist doesn't know what they're doing, or they're more interested in how long you're in therapy than they are actually helping you. I would find another therapist than one that actually addresses the feelings in the relationship.
Okay. I agree with you so much. I would, besides for on one point, I work with people on the cognitive aspects of things. I'm getting into the logical part. So I'm like really on par with you. But at the same time, I do think that emotions have to be processed, and we can identify the emotion and identify the fear, but we can't we have to let it be processed. We have to let it release, get out of our body, and then take actual action, like you said about it. Yeah,
but what you're doing, though, this is the step that is missing in the conversation, is forgiveness. Let me explain to you forgiveness. Okay. So this is where the conversation turns a little weird. So I apologize for that. But I actually have a mentor of mine who is translating the oldest Bible in existence that was written in Aramaic. Jesus,
Jewish, by the way. So I find this very interesting.
It's beautiful. I love it with your background, because the Jewish religion has a much more history than the Christian religion does. And if you get into the history of religion, but if you are a fan of history of religion, you know that Jesus spoke Aramaic. Okay, he didn't speak English. And so you realize in the history of religion that there have been translations from Aramaic to Greek to Latin to the modern languages. Those are the steps. And I call it dilutions. When there have been translations, a lot of times there have been dilutions in the meaning. And let me give you the biggest example that I have, and that is forgiveness. When the Greeks translated forgiveness, what they translated forgiveness to mean means to pardon. So when I perceive Esty as doing something wrong to me, when I forgive Esty, I pardon her. So I let Esty off the hook. The problem with that is the anxiety still exists for my perspective of what Esty supposedly done to me. Because remember, it's my perspective on what Esty did. What Jesus literally said, though, was that forgiveness means to cancel. When I forgave my parents, I canceled, I deleted from my memory bank all negative emotions that I had towards my parents. I now have absolute love and respect and adoration and all the good things about my parents because I forgave them. I have deleted all remnants of anxieties about my parents raising me, and that is forgiveness.
Yeah, by us, we say when we have Yom Kippur, like our day of atonement, once a year, then they say it's like, can't even describe it, because people sometimes like to say, like, you make you draw something with a pencil on a paper and then you erase it, but the mark is still there. It's like a completely new sheet of paper, like completely forgive. You can't see anything. So yeah. Okay. So at what point does a forgiveness come, and how do we go about doing that?
Well, again, the starting point of that is the conflict. When there is an angry response to a conflict, you know that the nerve has been struck. The goal is to make conscious what is unconscious or else it appears as fate. Again, if you do not bring awareness to your parents' divorce, for example, into your own marriage, where you can then deal with it consciously, it will become fate that you will end up getting divorced too. But if you bring it down and make it conscious and then deal with it, then it doesn't impact your relationship, because the ultimate goal in love and relationships is not to find love. That turns out to be the easy part. The goal is to find the barriers that you have within yourself that keeps you from fully opening up to loving somebody. Because ultimately where this conversation goes is to unconditional love.
So let's just repeat that. The ultimate goal in love and relationship is not to find love, but to
determine the barriers that you have inside of yourself that keeps you from completely becoming vulnerable. Love is vulnerability. That's what love is. At the beginning, vulnerability is the fear of getting hurt. Okay? And so what you do when you meet your better half, your other half, is you get over that wall and you open up your soul to another human being, and you commit to becoming vulnerable to that person. At the beginning, you put your best foot forward. In the psychology world, they call it the false facade. You're trying to impress that person, and they're trying to impress you. That's natural. But what couples need to learn is creating a judgment-free zone within the marriage so that they can bring up those things about their past that they're not so proud of. That is the true measure. For one thing, vulnerability is not a weakness. Vulnerability is the greatest measure of courage. For you to have the courage to be able to tell your spouse, I was molested when I was 12, or my dad used to beat the crap out of me every Sunday morning, or, my parents left me for 2 days and whatever. I mean, whatever those experiences or relationships that you're still angry about, that you're still mulling around in your head, that still means your self-talk with yourself is an argument, is a conflict, because you got to be happy with yourself first before you can be successfully happy in a relationship. And when you're happy with yourself is when your self-talk is positive.
Really, really, really interesting. Okay, so let's get to the mental aspect of things. How could we start understanding that part?
Great question. In fact, I do a 2-month weekly workshop when I work deep in details with couples. And at the beginning of every week, I ask the same question. And that question is, what is the most important thing that I'm teaching you? And the answer to that is understanding your partner's perspective. So let me explain what I mean by that. Okay? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So when most people hear that, they think of the pursuit of happiness part. But what I'm doing is I'm going to break down life and liberty. Life is morality. All life is precious, taught to us by the church. And in relationships, morality is empathy, or understanding your partner's feelings. Liberty, on the other hand, is a political concept, equality. And in relationships, understanding your partner's thoughts is called respect. So when you understand your partner's feelings, it's called empathy. And when you understand your partner's thoughts, it's called respect. So let me demonstrate a point if I could. Can I tell you a joke?
Let's go.
Okay, so let's lighten this conversation up a bit. We got real deep, so let's lighten this conversation up a bit. But I'm going to make a really cool point. So I have a friend of mine. This guy has sex 2 to 3 times a day. This guy works out twice a day. This guy reads 2 books a week. And all I ever hear from this guy, all I ever get from this guy are the constant complaints about how much he hates prison life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the point I'm making with that joke is the vision you had about sex 2 to 3 times a day, your eyes kind of opened up a little wider when I said that. And then I changed it to prison sex. And think about how much your perspective changed about sex before and after I said prisons, right? And so the point is, in fact, let me give you a more practical example. Do you get mad at slow drivers? Okay. I used to, Esty, but I have solved that problem. And how I solved that problem, my epiphany was when I looked at the slow driver from their perspective. When I sat in their seat and realized that they were driving someplace too, just at a different speed than me. When I am able to look at the other driver from the other driver's
Okay, do you want to hear something really funny now? When you said slow drivers, do you know what driver I thought you meant?
What?
Like a driver on a computer.
Oh, no. I'm talking about a slow driver.
Talking about perspectives here, okay? So this is like one vision I'm envisioning, and then all of a sudden you're saying going somewhere else, and I'm trying to make sense of what you're saying.
But the point I'm making, if you and the point about that analogy is imagine the impact in a marriage.
Right.
When each person is able to look at their conflicts from their partner's perspective. In fact, I call it Jesus's number one rule to me is treat others as you want to be treated. We could end our culture of divorce immediately. We would go home and our mission would be accomplished. If everybody treated their spouse the way they wanted their spouse to treat them, that would eliminate the problem completely.
Not everybody wants to be treated but the same way.
We all want to be treated with respect. We all want to be treated kindly. We all want to be loved. We all want to be cared for. It's called common sense. We all want the same things when it comes to being happy in a marriage. If you were to sit down and list out what you would want in a marriage to be happy, they could be different things. But you want to be treated nicely. We're not talking about whether you want to be the math expert and he doesn't. I'm talking about the emotional component of a relationship, which is if I'm treating you kindly because I want you to treat me kindly. If I'm treating you angrily, I don't want you to be angry with me. It's a common sense dialogue on which one is the better. It's the better approach for a successful marriage.
Yeah. Oh, so
a lot to get your head around, but that is the point. This is not a simple conversation. There's a lot that goes on to, but at the end of the day, Esty, what I'm doing is I'm eliminating arguments and I'm eliminating the control mechanism. If you take control out of the marriage, where you both have an equal say, what I'm teaching, this is probably the most profound thing that I say, is that I am teaching couples to take on the world instead of taking on each other. And once you go from this, and the other thing is obviously is to get people to do this instead of this. You know, what is the easy thing? It's Estes. It's all Estes. You guys heard it. It's all Estes' fault. I didn't do anything wrong here. Everything. But instead of saying it's Estes' fault, say, well, what did Tim have to do with this conflict, right? What is my perspective? Because we're supposed to be using these, again, a mirror. Your spouse is a mirror. Your spouse is reflecting who you are. And instead of blaming your spouse, you're supposed to be looking in a mirror so that you can get to know yourself better. That's when two people learn that. That's when two people learn to grow together. My job is not to fix you. My job is to hold your hand while you fix yourself. That is the goal.
Really, really interesting. Now, before we finish this, I want to hear a bit about the maturing process.
So a balanced ego is not when you're better than anybody else. It's when you're better than you used to be. That is step number one. That is the forgiving the parent step. The very first step, that's when you're born into adulthood. That when I forgave my parents, I cried. There's no logic. I actually realized that I was wrong. Okay, admitting you're wrong is a step in the maturing process, and that begins when you let go of your perception of all the things in your childhood that somebody else did to ruin your childhood. Like I thought my parents had ruined my childhood. But what you're doing in that process, okay, here's the biggest point of your question, Esty. Enlightenment comes at a price. And that price is you have to give up your limitations. That's what the maturing process does. Is when you're going through the maturing process, you're eliminating those negative beliefs about yourself. You're not worth it. You can't do it. You're not good enough. That happens once you cut your strings from other people defining who you are. My biography won't be finished until my obituary, and only God knows my real name. Because you're learning things like patience, for example. probably the most difficult thing for us to learn in this information-laden age that we live in today, where everything comes at our fingertips at a second, at a moment's notice, is the concept of patience. You're also learning not to be judgmental. Okay? The difference between somebody who is intelligent and somebody who is ignorant is one of them knows they're ignorant. One of the other steps in the maturing process is when you mature to the point of realizing that you don't know everything.
Yeah.
My 16-year-old son knows everything. Just ask him. Okay. When you're a teenager, you're supposed to, this is again, developing self-identity like you and I were talking about before we start recording this. This is the notion of we are supposed to be building an identity. So let me answer the ultimate question this way. So let me ask you a question. So give me one word that you can think of to describe the concept of equality. Just one word. Just one word.
Equal?
Oh, okay, so fine. So let me ask the question this way. If you were a slave and you were in bondage, you had handcuffs, you had an owner, you were a piece of property. Moses, talking about the Jewish religion, right? What would equality mean for the slaves of Egypt? What do you think they would look at equality? What would it mean to them? Big, ding, 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 ding. She wins the award. The big prize goes to Essie, freedom.
To Tim, you're asking the question in just the perfect way.
Exactly.
Mediation. Yes.
Exactly. So when you understand the concept of equality, what that means is, and this is where the responsibility comes in, that means you have the freedom to grow into who you are supposed to become, and your partner has the freedom to grow into he or she is supposed to become. But again, like the giving up the limitations, you are responsible for figuring out who you are supposed to become. You can't be blaming the other people on who you are supposed to become. There's a responsibility that comes along the maturing process that once you get there, you realize that you can't be blaming other people for your life. It's your responsibility. That's where the codependence goes away. You know, the concept of codependence in relationship. If you have it, you're still looking for your partner to convey some sort of insecurity to make up for some sort of fear that you haven't come to terms with. So that's when your partner starts losing their identity. And that's where the control mechanism starts kicking in, because I haven't figured out who I am. And so it's not my fault, because we all know everything's Esky's fault. So we can blame Esky on this instead of me looking at myself and what I'm supposed to be learning from this lesson instead of blaming other people. When you can quit blaming other people, you've made a big step in the maturing process.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
There's a responsibility for being an adult. You have to accept that responsibility. But when the rewards you get, though, let me talk about the rewards. A person who's in a relationship that is defined by control is in prison. And what's so fascinating about it is it's not only the person being controlled, it's also the person doing the control. Have you ever heard of Eddie Vedder, Pearl Jam? You've never heard of the band Pearl Jam?
No.
Okay, they're an alternative rock band. No big deal. But here's a line from one of his songs. Once I built an ivory tower so I could worship from above. But when I climbed down to be set free, she let me in again. So when he built a tower thinking he was better than his wife, he had built himself a prison. And it wasn't until he climbed down to see his wife eye to eye that he was able to be set free. So you're either going to have freedom in a marriage or prison. And to me, there's no greater prison sentence than one with somebody that you love. In fact, I won't get into the details, but I have a Hitler section, but I won't go through that. But the thing about that I found fascinating, there were a lot of people that, obviously a lot of people died, but a lot of traumatic responses to the Holocaust. But there were people that were Jewish that said, he could do that to me, but I'm not going to let him take away who I am. And there were people that actually survived. I have a story in my book of a person who survived the Holocaust. But I love that example because Hitler can't imprison you the way your spouse can. Because you have love for you. Nobody had any love for Hitler, but you have love for your spouse. And that's a worse prison to me because that's an internal prison. I can take all your external stuff away from you, but if you have an emotional bond to me, that's an internal prison that to me is even more torturous and painful. So you have that choice or freedom for you and your partner.
Oh, wow. Yes. That when you put it in that perspective, it's like, okay, anyone who is not feeling 100% free right now, go and take some action right now. That's just crazy. Okay. So before we get to our final question, where could Life Fixers connect with you and learn more about you?
Thank you for that question. So the best way to do this, and again, I have a free 2-hour seminar. Just feel free to email me and we can discuss that. My email address is my name, which is Tim Kellis, Kellis at happyrelationships.com. Tim Kellis at happyrelationships.com. The other way to connect with me, so it's a Facebook group. The name of the group is the Marriage Support Group. So you go to Facebook, you search the Marriage Support Group. You'll see a picture of a couple kissing. I just went over 18,000 members yesterday.
Wow.
So, and I'm adding about 2,000 members a month. So I'm going to be at 20,000 members in no time at all. And then I'm on my way to even doubling from there. So I've built a really great community. And one of the things that the reason why that community has grown the way it is I have been kicked out of about 12 different marriage groups because I go and try and help a couple, and the founder considered soliciting. And so that really showed me what I do that's different than literally all the other marriage groups is I allow other marriage experts to contribute. In fact, I promote it because I want the experts to be able to lend voice. Now, some are good, some aren't good. And that's where the audience can listen to what these people, because it's public now. It's within the group. It's a private group, but within the group, it's a public conversation. We can all see that. So people can see who's adding value, who's being helpful. And so I'm trying to get this community of people that realize that there is a base of knowledge that people can learn. And once they learn that, they will know how to create a lifelong marriage. So feel free to join me on that group as well. But again, the easiest way is Tim Kellis at happyrelationships.com, and we can set up the seminar.
Amazing. Okay. So those links will be in the show notes. Now, for our final question, one that I ask everyone is, how would you describe an extraordinary relationship without using love, connection, and for you, I'm putting in freedom?
So let me answer the question this way. Okay. It is amazing to me that couples will go on vacation and they will fight. And just so you know, the reason for that is they're getting out of their routine. You know, we can get in a routine. We get up, we eat breakfast, we're fighting, we're mad, we go to work, we come back, we fight, we eat dinner, whatever, we get along or whatever that routine is, but we get into a routine. But when you go on vacation, you get out of that routine. I was working with a couple once, and a couple of weeks after I finished working with them, the wife texted me, she's like, we're on vacation. I knew immediately that they were having a good time. So go on vacation without any of this stuff. Go on vacation, because what I'm doing, Esty, is I'm in essence teaching you to like your partner. Not love, but to like, get along with each other, be friends with each other, enjoy spending time with each other. And when you go on vacation, you're going to create some amazing memories.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Me for someone who loves traveling, totally in agreement with that. Okay, well, thank you so much, Tim. This was really informative, had so much information. Guys, you might want to listen to it again. I feel like there were some things that you missed because it was so packed full of value. And I really appreciate your time here today.
I cannot thank you enough for giving me an opportunity to speak and to give me voice to something I feel is very important. My mission is to lower the divorce rate in this country. So I can't tell you how much I thank you for giving me an opportunity to help and to teach. And I hope some people got some insight in what we talked about today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's all for this episode of the Life Fix University podcast, but I have a huge favor to ask of you that will not only support the show, but will also help the people you love most. We are striving for 1 million downloads by the end of 2025, and we can't do this without your help. If you love this episode, please share it with 2 of your family and friends so they too can rewire their brains to have an extraordinary marriage. It was awesome spending time with you, and I'll see you on the next episode.